Alpha King watched Omega mocked for her faded mark and asked who hid the second mark beneath. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Alexander Stone, the Alpha King of the kingdom, stood tall in the grand hall, his dark eyes scanning the crowd below. He was a man of power, a leader who had commanded respect since his coronation. With a strong, chiseled jaw and a presence that commanded attention, he looked every bit the ruler that he was. But today, something in the air felt different. His gaze drifted to the far corner of the room, where Olivia Hart, and Omega, stood alone, her head slightly lowered. She wasn't like the other Omegas who had gathered in the palace for the annual ceremony. Her faded mark, once bright and proud, now barely visible, seemed to mock her every step. A mark that should have been a symbol of strength was now a reminder of her weakness. As the nobles around her whispered and snickered, Olivia tried to ignore their cruel words. The Omega's mark was something revered in their world. It was a sign of identity, a symbol of a person's place in the hierarchy. But Olivia's was faint, almost invisible, and as a result, she became an easy target for mockery. Her heart clenched with every whisper, every laugh, but she held her head high, even as tears welled up in her eyes. She wasn't the only one in the room who felt the sting of judgment, but she was the one who bore it most heavily. She had always been different from the others. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the shame that came with her faded mark. It was as if it told a story no one was willing to hear. And that was when Alexander's eyes locked onto hers. He had been watching her for longer than she realized. From his throne, he had seen the way the other nobles treated her, how they mocked her for something she had no control over. He knew the power of the Alpha's gaze, and he could tell from the way Olivia stood there, so quietly, that she was holding her breath. He rose from his throne and made his way down the steps, his footsteps echoing in the grand hall. The murmurs of the crowd ceased as he approached, the weight of his presence silencing them. He reached Olivia, and for the first time that evening, she felt a shift in the room. The Alpha King stood before her, towering, but there was something different in his eyes, something curious. "Olivia," he said softly, his voice cutting through the tension. She looked up at him, startled. "Who hid the second mark beneath?" he asked, his tone both commanding and gentle. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. Was he talking about her? The question hung in the air, full of promise and mystery. Little did she know, this question would change everything. Olivia stood frozen, her heart racing as Alexander's words hung in the air. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. She stared up at him, not knowing what to say. The Alpha King, a figure of immense power, was asking her about the faded mark that had been a source of shame for as long as she could remember. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. Why was he asking about her mark? What did he see in her that others did not? The room around them was silent now, the mocking whispers of the nobles forgotten in the wake of Alexander's question. Olivia's palms were sweating, and her throat tightened. She had never felt more exposed, yet at the same time, there was a strange sense of curiosity in his gaze. It wasn't the usual look of disdain or indifference that she was accustomed to from others in the court. It was different. She cleared her throat, struggling to find her voice. I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty," she managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. Alexander studied her closely, his expression unreadable. He wasn't convinced by her response, but he wasn't pressing her for an answer just yet. "The second mark," he repeated softly, his tone not unkind. "It's there, isn't it? Beneath the faded one." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. How could he know? She had kept her secret hidden for years, ever since she was a child. The second mark was something that had been concealed, buried beneath the first, faint mark that had always defined her. It was a mark she had been told to hide, to ignore, and most of all, to never let anyone see. She had obeyed. But now, standing before Alexander, it felt like the truth was slowly slipping out of her grasp. I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's gaze softened for a moment, and he took a small step closer to her. You don't have to explain now, he said, his voice low and reassuring. But know this, I will find out. You don't have to bear this burden alone. For a brief moment, Olivia thought she saw something in his eyes, something that resembled compassion. It was a rare sight, especially coming from someone like him, the Alpha King who commanded respect with a single glance. But before she could process what was happening, the moment passed, and Alexander turned away. The crowd in the room slowly began to murmur again, the tension lifting ever so slightly. Olivia felt a strange sense of relief mixed with confusion. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't completely invisible. Alexander's words echoed in her mind as she tried to steady her breathing. You don't have to bear this burden alone. What did he mean by that? Was he truly willing to help her? The idea was almost too overwhelming to consider. But one thing was certain, today had changed everything. Olivia had no idea what the future held, but she knew that Alexander's question had opened a door, and she was standing on the threshold of something she could not yet understand. Olivia returned to her quarters after the grand ceremony, her mind swirling with the events of the day. Alexander's words echoed in her thoughts, a constant reminder of the Alpha King's unexpected attention. She had never imagined that someone of his stature would notice her, let alone speak to her with such curiosity. But as the door closed behind her, a strange mixture of relief and confusion settled over her. She paced the room, trying to make sense of what had happened. Was he truly interested in her? Or was this just some form of royal duty, an attempt to ease the tension in the room? She wanted to believe that it was more than that, but the reality of the situation weighed heavily on her heart. Olivia had always been an outsider. As an Omega, she was seen as weak and insignificant in the eyes of many, especially among the powerful alphas who ruled their world. Her faded mark had always been a source of shame, something that made her stand out in the worst way. She had spent her life hiding the truth, living in the shadows of those around her. But Alexander, his question had stirred something within her. What did he mean by, you don't have to bear this burden alone? Was he offering help? And if so, why? The questions gnawed at her as she sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers tracing the edges of her own mark. The faint lines on her skin had been with her for as long as she could remember, a constant reminder of her place in the world. But beneath them, hidden from view, was the second mark, a mark that held power, a mark that could change everything. She had always been told to keep it hidden, that it was a danger to her. But why? Why had she been forced to live in secrecy all these years? Olivia could not answer her own questions. She had always followed the rules, never daring to question the traditions of their society. But now, with Alexander's words hanging in the air, she wondered if there was more to the story than she had been told. The truth was out there, and it felt as though it was calling to her. The next few days were a blur. Olivia found herself avoiding the court, staying in her quarters longer than usual. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was changing, that the world around her was shifting in ways she couldn't control. She kept her distance from Alexander, but his presence lingered in her mind, as if he were watching her from afar. It wasn't until a week later that he sought her out again. She had been in the gardens, trying to clear her mind, when she heard his voice behind her. Olivia, Alexander said, his voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Olivia turned to face him, her heart pounding. There was no mistaking the seriousness in his tone. She swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. What is it, Your Majesty? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. I know you're hiding something, he said, his words steady and sure. And I need to know what it is. It's time to stop pretending. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't speak, the weight of his words sinking in. He knew there was more to her than anyone had ever realized. She began, but the words failed her. Alexander waited, his expression unreadable. He didn't push her, but he didn't back down either. Olivia knew that the time for secrets was over. The burden of the second mark had been hers alone for far too long. But now, she had to decide whether she would trust him with the truth or continue to hide in the shadows. The decision was hers to make, but for the first time in her life, the possibility of a different future seemed within reach. Olivia stood there, frozen, her heart beating wildly as Alexander's gaze pierced through her. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken words. The weight of his presence pressed down on her, and she felt a flicker of fear, mixed with something else, something that almost felt like hope. She had never been good at secrets. Her entire life had been a lie, a carefully constructed facade built on hiding the truth of her existence. And now, Alexander had come to unearth it. I can't hide it anymore, can I? Olivia thought to herself, her hands trembling at her sides. Alexander's eyes softened slightly, but his resolve didn't waver. He wasn't angry, just determined, and in that moment, Olivia realized something. He wasn't here to condemn her. He was here to understand. Olivia, he said again, his voice still steady, but there was a gentleness in it now. You don't have to carry this burden alone. I can help you, but you have to trust me. Olivia opened her mouth to speak, but the words felt trapped in her throat. How could she explain something so deeply ingrained in her? How could she tell him about the second mark, the hidden power that had been forced into the shadows for so long? The mark that could change everything. I don't know how. She finally managed to whisper. Alexander nodded slowly, as though he understood. It's all right, he said softly. You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I need to know that you're willing to face the truth, even if it's painful. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, her mind racing. She had spent her entire life avoiding the truth, burying the part of herself that could change her fate. But Alexander's words, his calm presence, made her realize something important. She didn't have to hide anymore. Slowly, with great hesitation, Olivia lifted her hand to her collarbone, where the faint mark she had always shown the world rested. She gently traced the outline of it, the familiar lines that had defined her since childhood. This is the mark of an omega, she began, her voice barely audible. It's what people see when they look at me. It's what they judge me by. Alexander remained silent, his eyes never leaving her, waiting patiently. Olivia swallowed hard before continuing. But beneath this mark, there's another. A second one. A mark that I've kept hidden for years. I wasn't supposed to have it. It's not normal for an omega to have two marks. Her hand dropped to her side, and she took a shaky breath. The words had come out, and with them, a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't sure what Alexander would say next, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was alone in her secret. Alexander stepped closer, his gaze softening even further as he took in her words. So, you've been hiding your true self all this time? He asked, his voice filled with quiet understanding. Olivia nodded, her eyes downcast. Yes, I was told to hide it. It was dangerous, they said, that if anyone found out, it could ruin everything. Alexander's expression hardened for a moment, but it wasn't anger that flickered across his face. It was something deeper, something protective. No one should have to live in fear of who they are, he said, his voice low but firm. You've been hiding a part of yourself that's not only important, it's powerful. And I won't let you keep hiding it, not anymore. His words were like a promise, a vow to help her break free from the chains of her past. Olivia felt her heart swell, a sense of relief washing over her. For the first time, she felt like there was someone who truly saw her, someone who understood. But how do we move forward? She asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Alexander gave her a reassuring smile, a rare softness in his gaze. We take it one step at a time. You're not alone, Olivia. Not anymore. Olivia felt the weight of Alexander's words settle in her chest, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, hope. She had spent so much of her life hiding, living in the shadow of her own secret, afraid of what would happen if anyone discovered the truth. But now, standing here in front of the Alpha King, she found herself wondering if it was finally time to step into the light. The days that followed were a blur, filled with moments of quiet contemplation and moments of anxiety. Olivia found herself spending more time in the palace gardens, seeking solace in the quiet beauty of the flowers and the sound of birds singing in the trees. She wasn't sure what Alexander's offer truly meant or what he wanted from her. But there was a part of her that felt she could trust him, a part of her that believed in the possibility of a future where she didn't have to hide anymore. The second mark, the one that had been hidden for so long, was still a mystery to her. She had never fully understood why it had appeared, or why she had been told to keep it a secret. All she knew was that it was dangerous, something that could destroy everything she had ever known. And yet, with Alexander's words echoing in her mind, Olivia began to question everything she had been taught. What if the second mark was not something to fear? What if it was a gift, a sign of strength, rather than a curse? But those thoughts were difficult to hold on to. The pressure of living a life of secrecy had been so ingrained in her that even considering the possibility of embracing the truth felt like a rebellion. Rebellion against everything she had been told to believe. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky was painted in hues of gold and pink, Olivia found herself in the gardens once again, lost in her thoughts. The cool evening breeze carried with it the scent of jasmine, and the quiet rustle of leaves seemed to offer a sense of peace she rarely felt. But her peace was short-lived, as she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Turning, she saw Alexander standing there, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Olivia," he said, his voice calm, yet there was an intensity in his eyes. "It's time." She blinked, her heart racing in her chest. "Time for what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Time to stop hiding," he said simply. "It's time to face the truth, whatever it may be." Olivia's heart pounded as she met his gaze. The weight of his words was heavy, and for a moment, she felt paralyzed, unable to move. She had spent so long running from the truth, afraid of what it might mean for her future. But now, standing here in front of Alexander, she realized that she could not keep running forever. The truth was going to find its way out, whether she was ready or not. "You don't have to do this alone," Alexander continued, his voice soft but firm. "I'm here to help you. Whatever you choose, I'll stand by you." Olivia looked at him, uncertainty and fear swirling in her chest, but there was something else too, something that made her feel like she could trust him, something that made her feel like she wasn't alone. Slowly, she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm ready," she said, though her heart was still heavy with fear. "I'll face it, but I don't know what comes next." Alexander offered her a small smile, a look of reassurance in his eyes. "We'll face it together," he said. And in that moment, Olivia knew that this was the beginning of something new. The road ahead was uncertain, and the future was unknown. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to face it alone. The following days were filled with an anxious anticipation that Olivia couldn't shake. She spent most of her time in the palace, reflecting on the path that lay ahead, and trying to prepare herself for what was to come. Alexander's words still echoed in her mind. "We'll face it together." For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she was ready for the truth. It was easy to say she was ready, but when the moment came, could she truly embrace what she had hidden for so long? Each passing hour seemed to stretch on endlessly. Olivia found herself walking through the palace halls, her thoughts tangled, and her steps slower than usual. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing on her chest. Would revealing the second mark change everything? What if it led to even more questions, to more scrutiny and fear? What if it didn't make her feel free, but instead pushed her even further into the shadows? That night, after the sun had set and the palace was cloaked in the quiet stillness of the evening, Olivia found herself standing in front of a mirror in her quarters. She had taken to avoiding the reflection of her own image lately, unwilling to face the parts of herself she had long hidden. But tonight felt different. She reached up, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the faded mark on her collarbone. It had been a part of her for so long, a mark of submission, of obedience to the rules she had been taught to follow. But beneath it, hidden from view, was the second mark, the mark she had never allowed herself to acknowledge fully, the mark that could change her life forever. She took a deep breath, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of fear and determination. Slowly, she began to unbutton her gown, the fabric sliding off her shoulders, revealing the pale skin beneath. For a moment, she hesitated. Was she really ready to reveal the truth? Could she truly expose the part of herself that had been kept in the dark for so long? She glanced over her shoulder, as though expecting someone to be standing behind her, but there was only silence. Alexander's face appeared in her mind, his gentle words, his unwavering resolve. "You're not alone," he had said. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. With one final breath, she gently pulled back the collar of her gown and exposed the second mark. To the mirror, it was just as she had always remembered it. hidden beneath the first, glowing faintly with an almost ethereal light. The mark seemed to hum with power, a power that had always been there, but had never been acknowledged. Olivia felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at it. It was both a curse and a gift, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. She had been told to keep it hidden, that it would make her dangerous, that it would set her apart in ways she couldn't understand. But now, looking at it, Olivia wasn't so sure anymore. Perhaps it wasn't a curse. Perhaps it was a part of her that had been waiting to be set free. She reached out, her fingers gently grazing the mark. A spark of energy surged through her fingertips, and she gasped in surprise. It was as if the mark had awakened, responding to her touch. A wave of warmth spread through her, filling her with a sense of strength she had never known before. The moment felt surreal, like something was shifting within her. The fear that had gripped her for so long began to recede, replaced by a sense of clarity. She wasn't just Olivia Hart, the Omega with the faded mark. She was more than that. She was someone with power, with a strength that had been lying dormant. The truth, though terrifying, was hers to embrace. She could feel it now. This was her moment, and it was time to stop hiding. As the warmth lingered within her, Olivia felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't an end, but a beginning. Tomorrow, she would face the truth, and whatever came next, she would no longer face it alone. She would face it with Alexander by her side. The thought brought her a quiet sense of comfort. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out. The next morning, Olivia found herself standing outside the grand doors of the council chamber, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the decision she had made the night before hung heavily on her, but there was no turning back now. She had decided to face the truth, to reveal the second mark, and to stand beside Alexander as he promised to help her. The cool morning air brushed against her skin as she took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She was not the same woman who had entered the palace just days ago. She could feel the change within her, a strength awakening that she had never known before. With each step she took toward the door, the sense of fear that had once held her in place began to recede. She was no longer hiding. She had nothing to fear. At least, that was what she told herself. As the doors swung open, Olivia entered the council chamber, where Alexander stood waiting. His presence was commanding, yet there was a softness in his gaze when he saw her. He had always been a figure of authority, a leader among alphas, but in that moment, she saw him not as the king, but as the man who had promised to stand by her side. "You're ready?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with anticipation. Olivia nodded, though her throat was tight. She couldn't speak for a moment, the reality of the situation settling in. The room was filled with nobles and officials, all seated at the long table, their eyes flicking toward her as she entered. Some looked curious, others skeptical, but none of them knew the full story. Only Alexander. And now, it was time to share it with the world. "I am," Olivia finally replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. She walked toward the center of the room, where Alexander had positioned himself, and took a deep breath. "There is something I've kept hidden for many years," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "Something that has shaped my life, but that I have never shared with anyone. Until now." She paused, glancing around at the gathered faces. Their expressions were a mix of confusion, curiosity, and, in some cases, skepticism. She felt their judgment hanging in the air, but she stood firm. "I am not just an Omega," she continued, her words gaining strength with each syllable. "I carry the mark of an Alpha, a second mark that has been hidden beneath the first." A murmur rippled through the room at her words. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the disbelief, the shock. But she didn't falter. She had come this far. "I was told to keep it hidden, to bury it deep within myself. But no more. The time has come to reveal the truth." Olivia stepped back slightly, and with a calm breath, she lifted the collar of her gown, exposing the second mark for all to see. It was faint, glowing with a soft, almost ethereal light, a mark of power that had long been concealed. The room fell into complete silence as they all took in the sight of it. For a moment, Olivia thought she could hear her heartbeat in the quiet, the beating of her own heart and the heavy silence of those around her. It felt as though the world had stopped for a brief second, the truth hanging in the balance. Alexander stepped forward, his presence powerful yet reassuring. He looked at the gathered nobles, his gaze unwavering. "This is Olivia Hart," he said, his voice strong. "She is not just an Omega. She carries a power that has been hidden from the world, and she will no longer be treated as lesser." Olivia's breath caught in her throat as Alexander's words settled in. He was standing by her. The weight of everything, of her past, of her fears, of the years spent hiding, began to lift, replaced by something new. It was not just acceptance, but a promise of change. The truth had been revealed, and now there was no going back. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Olivia felt the strength to walk it. She was not alone anymore. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity. The weight of Olivia's revelation hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. As she stood there, her chest rising and falling with each breath, she could feel the eyes of everyone on her. The nobles, the officials, the courtiers who had watched her for years with disdain and judgment. But this time, it was different. This time, there was no hiding. There was no shame in the truth. She was who she was, and for the first time, she felt the strength in that. The room, which had been filled with murmurs and gasps, grew quieter as the truth settled in. No one spoke at first, the shock of what she had said paralyzing them. Even the most powerful alphas in the room seemed at a loss for words. But Alexander stood tall beside her, his unwavering support a shield against the uncertainty that had once consumed her. His presence beside her now felt like a silent vow that she would no longer face this alone. The murmur of voices began to rise again, some filled with disbelief, others with uncertainty, but none daring to challenge Alexander's stance. Finally, one of the nobles, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a stern expression, spoke. This is unprecedented," he said, his voice a mix of confusion and astonishment. "An Omega with the mark of an Alpha? Such a thing has never been heard of. It's unnatural." Olivia felt a flicker of fear in her chest, but it was quickly swallowed by the certainty that had built within her. She had known this moment would come, had expected resistance. But she was no longer afraid of their judgment. "It is not unnatural," Alexander spoke, his voice calm but commanding, cutting through the growing murmurs. "It is simply the truth. Olivia is no less an Omega for possessing this mark, and she is no less deserving of respect." Olivia's heart swelled at his words, the weight of years of shame lifting from her shoulders. Alexander's unwavering defense of her felt like the final step in her journey. He wasn't just protecting her. He was acknowledging her as an equal, not a lesser. "But what does this mean?" Another voice interrupted, this time a woman sitting at the far end of the table. "What will this change for our kingdom? Will this change the order of things?" Olivia turned to face the woman, meeting her gaze without flinching. "It means that things don't have to remain as they are," Olivia replied, her voice steady. "It means that we have the power to change, to evolve. I've spent my life hiding because of fear, but I no longer fear what I am." The room fell into an uneasy quiet again, the weight of Olivia's words sinking in. She wasn't just speaking for herself now. She was speaking for all those like her, all those who had been forced into silence, forced into the shadows. For the first time, she felt as though her voice could be heard. Alexander stepped forward slightly, his eyes scanning the room. "What Olivia says is true," he said. "This kingdom has long been bound by outdated rules and old beliefs. It is time for change, time to embrace the truth, whatever form it takes. Olivia's mark, her power, is not a threat. It is a gift that will shape the future of this kingdom." He paused, letting his words settle before continuing. "And I will not stand by and watch her, or anyone else, be made to feel lesser because of it." The nobles were silent for a long moment, processing his words. Olivia could feel the uncertainty in the air, but she also felt something else: hope. The path ahead would be difficult, she knew that. There would be challenges, resistance, and obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that the truth was now out in the open. And no matter what came next, she was ready to face it. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. And with Alexander by her side, she knew she would not face the future alone. The following days were filled with tension, but also with an undeniable sense of purpose. The kingdom, once bound by rigid traditions and outdated rules, seemed to be on the verge of change. Olivia could feel the shift in the air, a weighty expectation, as if the very ground beneath her was stirring with possibility. The nobles, who had once dismissed her as insignificant, now watched her with a new level of curiosity. Some still whispered behind closed doors, unsure of what the truth about her second mark meant, but many were beginning to see her differently. No longer was she the quiet, submissive Omega with the faded mark. She was Olivia Hart, a woman with a power that no one could ignore. Alexander had remained by her side, steadfast and unwavering. Since that day in the council chamber, he had been her constant support, both in public and in private. His actions spoke louder than any words could, as he made it clear that Olivia's place in the kingdom was not just as a passive bystander, but as an equal. But despite the growing acceptance, Olivia could still feel the tension in her own heart. The weight of her revelation had not fully lifted. Every time she passed a noble, or when the courtiers spoke of her, she felt their eyes on her, searching for something she couldn't quite define. It was as if they were waiting for her to falter, for her to prove that she wasn't what she claimed to be. But Olivia refused to let their doubts control her. She had faced her fears, had exposed the part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. She was no longer that fearful girl, ashamed of what she was. She was stronger now, not just because of the mark that had been revealed, but because she had chosen to live in the truth. One morning, after a long night of contemplation, Olivia found herself in the palace gardens once again. The sun had barely risen, casting soft rays of light across the dew-covered flowers. She had come to the gardens to clear her mind, but as she stood there, taking in the tranquility of the moment, she realized something. The truth had set her free, but it had also opened a door to a future she hadn't fully considered. What would she do with this newfound freedom? She had always known her place in the kingdom, first as an Omega, and then as a woman with a secret. But now, she was unsure of what her role would be in this new world where her power was no longer hidden. It was in that moment of uncertainty that Alexander appeared, stepping quietly through the garden's archway. His presence, as always, was commanding, but there was something in his eyes, a softness, a tenderness, that told Olivia that he understood her struggle. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice gentle, yet laced with concern. Olivia turned to him, meeting his gaze. "I'm not sure what comes next," she admitted, her voice low. "I've spent my life hiding, Alexander. I don't know how to live any other way." Alexander stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to live any other way," he said firmly. "You just have to live as you are, as you've always been meant to." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had led them here. Olivia felt a sense of peace wash over her, a calm that she hadn't realized she was seeking. For the first time, she understood what he meant. She didn't have to change. She simply had to embrace who she was, the person she had always been, the person with both the strength of an Omega and the hidden power of an Alpha. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone. The future, whatever it held, was hers to shape. Alexander's hand found hers, his grip steady and sure. "You are not alone in this," he said softly, his voice filled with reassurance. "You never will be." The sincerity in his words, the truth of them, settled in Olivia's heart. She wasn't just a woman with a hidden mark. She was someone with the power to change the world. And with Alexander by her side, she knew that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Olivia felt ready to walk into it. The truth had set her free, and now, she was ready to embrace her place in the world, not as an Omega, not as an Alpha, but as herself.